Hello, this is Mark Fulmer, and today we do part 3 of the series we've had on examining the Seven Mountain Mandate. This actually will be the conclusion to our series, and we've been asking the questions, is it biblical or heretical? We're going to jump right into this today. Got a lot to cover. In the last program we looked at the usage of the term mountain in the Bible and lists of specific applications where it's used as a metaphor or symbolism for a significant sphere of influence, especially an institution. We discussed dominion, and we looked at the biblical terms that were used apart from any doctrinal extremes. Also, we introduced what we call the government mountain, which is one of the earliest institutions in the Bible following that of marriage and family. So today we're going to look at a couple of issues. We're going to do a highlight of, there's no way that we can devote just because of the sake of time, there's so much to cover today, but we're going to look at America's godly heritage. And I'm just going to try to do an overview. There's so much out there that really, as far as really solid American history, such as that by Dave and Tim Barton and others that have not gone the way of cancel culture and the rewriting of history, but actually historians of first rank looked at the history of our nation. We'll also discuss, as we conclude this, what's all this about Christian nationalism? We're going to be asking the question, can a person love their nation and Jesus? So we'll tackle that. So the nation's history that we have, I believe was very much my conviction, is that it was one of divine providence. And if you look at, although Christopher Columbus actually did not land on the northern continent of America, his vision for the discovery of the New World, the Americas, was one that he believed would be actually part of prophetic destiny. Not only was Columbus's Christian faith revealed in his personal logs and journals. He was a student of the Bible. He carried the scriptures with him, which was uncommon. And that day and time, he actually had his own translation of the Bible he would carry with him. And he had, when he went on his expeditions. And however, his most ambitious work ever was lost for nearly 4 centuries in a monastery in Spain, and it's titled the Libro das Leis Prophecies. In Latin, it's the Prophecies of Christopher Columbus. These manuscripts lay hidden away for centuries, and they were discovered. A project done at the University of Florida had undertaken the task of translating that great work they did. They translated one column, there's almost 300 pages here. One side of the page is in English, the other side is in Latin, so you can follow Christopher Columbus's prophecies there. What he really believed that the New World, there would be this prophetic mandate, and he went through chapter and verse of the scriptures, believing that the New World would become the center for world evangelism, the preaching of the gospel, but not only that, it would prepare the way for the return of Christ. Wow, yeah, you can read that for yourself. It is an amazing work, but Columbus, unfortunately, is a very devout Christian, very devout in his faith, a man of prayer, committed to Christ. His name, Christopher, means Christ bearer. and he reflected that in his signatures and his writings. But unfortunately, he would be vilified as a murderer, an explorer that was motivated by greed and financial gain in the last 25 to 30 years. Columbus Day would come to the point it would no longer be recognized, but it would become Indigenous Peoples Day because the view, again, rewriting history, was looking at he'd actually done so much harm to the Indians, the indigenous people groups of Americas. And so because of that, during the council culture movement in the 2020, where we saw rioting and burning streets, many historic memorials were torn down there. In Columbus, you will not find one single Columbus statue or memorial in the United States anywhere, and that's very sad. You have to travel outside the country to see one. So this man of God in history, he really believed that he was being led to this expedition to find the New World, which would be actually be a center for where the gospel was preached. There's so much more I could talk about on Christopher Columbus and this YouTube channel. You can actually look at some earlier presentations that I did years ago. Then later, the Pilgrims who landed on Plymouth Rock, they exemplified a Christian people who were fleeing from persecution to a new world also for religious liberty and freedom. And the history is amazing because they spend, prior to this journey, they spent 12 years studying under their pastor, learning the scriptures, and their belief was that the Lord was leading them to establish a nation that would be dedicated to religious liberty, freedom, but more so would be a place where Christ was exalted and honored. The Founders Monument, which is in Plymouth, Massachusetts, you can see information on that. Patriot Academy, Biblical Citizenship, and has some great material on it as well. So our nation's founders also, they had deeply embedded within their view, their convictions, was a biblical worldview. And as they drafted the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, the Bible was the single most frequently quoted document that the founders used. Yeah, there were those that were deist, but that was very much in the minority, the exception, not the majority. The founders, many of them were Bible-believing Christians, and also state constitutions that were drafted very early on had deeply embedded Christian language in them that exalted God and His Word as the supreme authority. Again, because the view that that our nation's founders had, and was that God and His Word were higher than any authority of government or a king. And so eventually there came this gross misinterpretation from history, our founding history, where Thomas Jefferson would write a letter to the Danbury Baptists, actually answering a question. They had a concern, would the government step in one day, as they experienced, as many other religious groups, as many churches and Christians experience, that their freedoms would be taken away. So Jefferson writes him a letter reassuring this, and he uses the phrase separation of church and state, which will not found in the Constitution, will not found in the Bill of Rights, anywhere. It is used in this letter and it was actually taken out of context, historical context, to really build this case that really an artificial one, that church and state need to be entirely separate. And the whole idea the founders had was not to create a government that cannot be influenced by the church. Their precept was government should have no place dictating to the church what to believe. And but again, that was all misconstrued, misinterpreted, and has been applied in error. There really isn't any separation of church and state. And even though in the Johnson Amendment that came out, this whole thing about the IRS and churches would lose their tax exempt status, that has now been clarified in the present administration under Donald Trump. So churches can endorse. They can, in Canada, they can have voter registrations. They can talk politics from the pulpit, which was the way it was in the original founding of our nation, because pastors in the 17th century, they would have election day sermons, and they would talk about political candidates, and they would rate them regarding their biblical values. Wow, yeah, that was then. And how we have shifted by buying this lie of the separation of church and state, because pastors and churches need to address these things regarding the political, because if they don't give us, if our pastors, our churches, Christian leaders are not giving us the guidance on how we should vote, those kind of things, evaluating candidates and their platforms from a biblical standpoint, then, where else we're going to get our information? We're going to get it from the media, mainstream media? No, I think not. From the progressive? Certainly not. But so we have to look at, in part 2, we addressed that Christians are called to be salt and light and influence every institution. We looked at the Great Commission to go into all the world and to disciple the nations, to make disciples of them. And so that was really not just the context of evangelism or missions in the classical definition, but it was to actually take the gospel and to influence our nations around the world. So in this case, for government and every institution should be influenced through a biblical worldview. So I want to ask this question. Is it possible for a Christian to love their nation and also love Jesus? If we look at the story of the centurion of great faith in Luke chapter 7, and it says this: when the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking them to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogues." From the story that he goes, centurion replies to his servants, to Jesus, that "I'm not worthy to have you even come into my house, but I am a soldier. I am a commander in the military, and I understand a thing about authority, and you're one that has authority. So you say the word, that my servant be healed, it will be done." And Jesus, of course, he marveled at that. He commended the faith of the centurion. He says, "Truly, in all of Israel, I've not seen such great faith." It's talking about a Gentile, a non-Jewish believer. So this individual, the centurion, you have to look, he had sworn an allegiance to serve the military on the behalf of the Roman Empire. But he also had great faith in God, the God of Israel specifically, and generously provided for the building of the synagogue in Capernaum, which its ruins still can be found today. It's said of the centurion that he loves our nation. Yes, the reference is to a Jewish nation, but this Gentile, a non-Jew, has a love and devotion to God as well as the nation. The word ethnos is used here, is usually translated as tribe or peoples, but also in this context, very well applied to meaning nation. Our English word patriot means one who loves and defends their nation. The centurion both loved God and nation and was serving in the military to defend it. You could say he was a patriot. Jesus had no problem with the centurion, but he commended him as one having great faith. Jesus could stop right there and say, whoa, wait a minute. You've got to swear allegiance only to me, only, as a disciple, a follower, and, forget the stuff about the nation and everything else. And, but he didn't say that. And so here's the amazing thing. So when we look at the question, Christian nationalism, what does it mean? The term Christian nationalism has come to be used in the past several years, and especially more frequently here lately. It's been used as a term of criticism in a derogatory sense, mostly by political and religious progressives. Interestingly enough, Christian nationalism also been used as a case against the 7 mountains of influence principles. And some claim that Christian nationalism is a form of spiritual idolatry, and they piously quote Jesus saying, "My kingdom is not of this world," or they quote Paul's statement, "We are citizens of heaven," and they sound so good. They sound so spiritual, and yet it results in this compartmentalized mentality where we become so heavenly minded, we're of no earthly good. We're actually, yes, our mind is on Christ, but it's here on the earth. And guess what? Even though Paul says we're citizens of heaven, there's no problem with dual citizenship, folks. We can be citizens of heaven as well as citizens of a nation, and that's just common sense as I see it. There are very vocal groups, such as Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Many other groups that are very vocal, and they proclaim these statements that I've mentioned to you, and they advocate the misinterpreted, misconstrued separation of church and state as their dogma. And I want to say again, the separation of church and state is an artificial one. It is a misinterpretation of Jefferson's quote, has nothing to do with the Constitution, has nothing to do with any of the founders' documents, but it has been misapplied through the decades to get us the state we're in now. And so those on the other side, using the argument against Christian nationalists, they say, oh, there should be the separation of church and state. Whoa, man. But I want to say this. We have to realize the criticism of Christian nationalism has created a great deal of confusion, as well as guilt for those who love their nation. So this has resulted with many Christians simply refusing to become civically engaged, and rather they stay within the confines of the 4 walls of their churches, which is exactly what the world would have us to do. I want to say the apostles And you look at the book of Acts, they didn't stay in the confines of, gee, we're having our nice little revival here, and look what God is doing, and stayed within their own four walls. No, they went out into the world. They went out Judea, Samaria, to all parts of the earth, preaching, teaching, speaking boldly the gospel of Christ in every area. Some simply are afraid of creating division or offending others with civic engagement for fear of being called a Christian nationalist. Yet, as in the case of the centurion in Luke's gospel, Jesus had no problem with love, loyalty, and service to one's nation in the same sense that you could also serve God. Psalm 33 verse 12 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people whom he has chosen as his heritage." You see, the principle of a godly nation is highlighted in the scriptures. It talks about that, if a nation that, when nations no longer honor God or serve him, they begin a downward spiral to destruction. And so it's proven throughout history. We look at scriptures, but we can also see the demise of the Western civilization, departing from Judeo-Christian biblical worldview, going after secular humanism and glorifying culture and society rather than transforming it. It's interesting that Christian nationalism was not used as a term of derision until Christians started vocalizing concerns for their nation and became active in civic engagement. So you realize, Christians, when we began to speak against things like LGBTQ, transgender agendas, against abortion, and those things, we began holding up the sanctity of marriage, the sacredness of life, all those things which are fundamentally in a biblical worldview there. And we became, as soon as we started becoming activists, speaking, having a voice in government, education, church, media, business, entertainment, all these institutions, these 7 institutions of influence, it was then that mainstream media and progressives began to use the label mockingly, those Christian nationalists. What are they doing? You remember back in President Trump's first term when he stood there